Okay, good day everyone. So I'll be demonstrating let's have another example of a C language program just to review you of what you have taken up during your programming one. So first, let's try to create a new project. So file new and then project. So again, we're going to choose console application, C project, and then place here the name of the project. Let's say lesson 02 for example. Then I'll just click OK. Then be sure to save it on the right folder. So let's say I'm going to create a new folder, lesson 2, then save. So I have here now our source code. So have your program to read rate per hour, number of hours work, then display gross pay, total deductions, net pay. Where gross pay is equal to the product of rate per hour and number of hours, and total deductions equals 100 plus 5% of gross pay, and net pay is equal to gross pay minus total deductions. So that's that's the problem, or that's a specification of the program that we're going to create or develop or design for this example. So the first thing we have to do is to analyze the problem. Okay, so we have to know the inputs and the outputs. So based from this, these are our inputs. We have rate per hour and number of hours work as our inputs, and these are our outputs. So that's one way of analyzing your problem, to determine what are the inputs and the outputs. So for the inputs, of course, you know that we're going to use scanf. That's one way of getting input from the user, scanf. And then for the outputs, we usually use the printf function or statement. But how do we solve for gross pay? So looking further at our specifications, we have here our formula for gross pay, total deductions, and net pay. So based from this, more or less, our input and our outputs are the variables that we will be using. So later on, maybe we'll be able to discover if there are more variables that we need for our program. But for now, we're going to declare the following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for our variables. So our first step is to declare the variables. So since these are monetary values, so we have to use float because we need fraction. So maybe we have float rate equals 0.0 or just 0, no problem. So that's our variable for rate per hour. Then float hours equals 0.0. So what are these? These are our inputs. Okay, and then we still have at least 3 more variables. So we have float gross pay, again equals 0.0 or just 0. Float TDED for our total deduction equals 0.0, and then float and pay equals 0.0. So I have here now declared the variables. again, so for you to determine the variables is for you to analyze the problem. And usually we have to determine the inputs and determine the outputs. And here we base our variables from our inputs and outputs. So next is, of course, we're going to read the read what our inputs, so rate per hour and hours worked. So read rate and hours. So how do we do that? Maybe we first place a prompt, enter rate or enter rate per hour, and then we have here scanf. So this time we use %f because it's a float. The data type is a float, so we have here %rate. Then for the next input, we have here enter hours, and scanf %f ampersand hours. So what we did here is, of course, we display the prompt, then the user now can enter the value for rate. Then we display another prompt, then the user now can enter the value for hours. So after this, we cannot display the output yet because we still don't know the values of the following. And we are given here how we can solve for the following. So we have gross pay, total deduction, and net pay. So in solving this, it should be in this order also. Why? Because we can only compute for total deduction if we know the value of gross pay. So that means that total deduction is dependent on the value of gross pay. And for net pay, we can only compute for the value of net pay if we know the value of gross pay and total deduction. So it should be in this order also. So let's compute. How do we compute? First, GPay. So where did I get GPay? That's the variable name I use for gross pay. It says here is equal to the product of rate and hours. So it's equal to rate. So how do we use multiplication in C language? We use asterisk and then hours. And then next, we compute for total deduction. So what variable did we use? We use T dead. So we also use here T dead is equal to 100 according to our formula, 100 plus 5% of gross pay. So what is 5%? That's 0.05. When you say 5% of gross pay, you actually multiply that to the value of gross pay. So that's a formula for deduction. The net pay is equal to what? The difference of gross pay and total deduction. So gross pay minus total deduction. That will be our net pay. Okay, then for our output, so let's say let's skip one line. So let's say, for example, I'm going to place here 15s colon and then 8.2f backslash n. That will be my format. So the first will be for my prompt, gross pay, and then the value for gross pay, GPay. So I'm actually displaying gross pay. The next I will be displaying what? So since it says here we're going to display gross pay, total deductions, and net pay. So next, printf. So I would like to that's 8.2f backslash n. So I would like to have more or less a presentable output, total deduction. So how many letters are this? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So let's say I'm going to place here around 17. And then T dead. And then printf 17s percent 8.2f backslash n. And then we have here net pay, and then we have here n pay, so that will display net pay. Okay, so this format 17s will be for these prompts here, and 8.2f will be for gpay, tdead, and netpay. So we can check our program now. So let's first rediscuss or review the program. So what we did here first is we declared the variables. And where did we base our variables? We base our variables from our problem, wherein we tried to analyze the problem by determining the inputs and the outputs of the program. So based from that, we were able to know the variables that we'll be using for the program. So we declared the variables. Then after that, to display the output, we need to know, or we need to read our inputs. That's why we have here reading the values of rate and hours. So we use scanf. But of course, it will be better if you will prompt the user, so that the user will know what value he or she, or what is being prompted to the user to enter. So here he will be entering rate, and next he will be entering hours. So after entering the value of rate and hours, so before we can display the output, we have to do the computation. We have to process the data. So in this example, gross pay is the product of rate and hours. Deduction is equal to 100 plus 5% of gross pay, and net pay is the difference of gross pay and total deduction. So we have to subtract. Then after that, we can now display the output. So in displaying the output, I just place maybe a separator. I have a blank space, then display gross pay, GPay, total deduction, so tdead, net pay, and pay. Again, this is for this prompt, and 8.2f will be for the variable. So let's try now if we don't have any more errors in our program. So you have to compile and run. So I'll be saving under lesson 2. So it says here enter rate. So let's say I would like to enter a rate of 500 pesos. Hours, let's say hours is 79.5 hours. And after I place enter key, so here's now my output. So gross pay is 39,750, total deductions is 2,087.50, and net pay is 37,662. So of course, if I run the program again, execute, run the program again, I'll be prompted to enter rate, and then hours, let's say 78.25, then that's the output. Okay, so that ends my demo. So I would like you to take a look at the source code, and now it's your turn to retype the program. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for viewing our lecture.